One of my concerns is, especially when it comes to PTSD, that there's just such a stigma when it comes to anything psychiatry related. Like, the brain is such a mystery. And as an organ, we don't think of mental health as it's originating in the brain. You know, if you had a broken arm, I wouldn't blame you for that. I would just say you have a broken arm and this is, a physical problem. We're going to fix it. But with mental health, people think there's something wrong with you. Another thing that I worry about is that people with PTSD think that they can never get better. And we actually have really good data showing that people do get better. PTSD is actually one of the more fixable things, and the brain is so plastic.
Today's episode of Minds on the Frontline explores how trauma changes the brain and what that means for those who serve. Dr. Tanja Jovanovic, a respected neuroscientist and professor at Wayne State University, joins us to discuss how stress, trauma, and PTSD physically impact brain function, and how understanding this can assist frontline workers. During this episode, we explore how childhood adversity, genetics, and repeated trauma can influence mental health, and why PTSD is more than just a diagnosis. It's a neurological response. Dr. Jovanovic also shares compelling research on fear processing, brain plasticity, and recovery, including emerging treatments that provide real hope. Minds on the Frontline is presented by the Frontline Strong Together 5 program, providing 24/7 mental health and crisis support for Michigan's first responders and their families. For more details about FST5, including free access to resources and ways to connect, please check out the episode description and follow us on social media. Thank you, and enjoy the show.
Well, good morning.
Good morning. How are you? Thank
Very
you
well.
for having me.
Thank you for joining us today, Doc. Can you introduce yourself? Tell everybody who you are, what you do, and where you do it.
My name is Tanja Jovanovic. I'm a professor in the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Neurosciences at Wayne State University. I'm also the David and Patricia Barron Chair for PTSD Neurobiology. When I came to Wayne State, they really were looking for someone who had expertise in post-traumatic stress disorder, and I've been working in that field for about 15 years before I came to Wayne State.
Right on. And what inspired you to concentrate on trauma, neuroscience, all that good stuff?
I was always really interested in how environment can impact the brain, and I got my PhD in watching monkeys behave. And I was sitting around watching monkeys. I got my PhD, and then I didn't know what to do with myself after I got my PhD.
Okay.
And the only job I could get in Atlanta was at the Atlanta VA. And so I started working with Vietnam veterans. And, there's a lot of jokes to be had about the transition from monkeys to veterans not being, that big of a jump.
Right.
But it actually really, really made me appreciate the sacrifice that veterans make. And I absolutely loved working with veterans and trying to understand how something that happened decades ago can still persist and haunt them. Because by the time I was a postdoc, they were all in their 60s, early 70s. They were like my grandfather. Yeah. And I just really appreciated working with them. And that got me really excited and trying to understand the risk factors for post-traumatic stress and how we can really help people manage that.
That's really cool. And that translates directly to our personal. Veterans and first responders have a lot of those similarities. Obviously, when you're under war, Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, you have incredible amounts of trauma on you, stress, all these things, and you are in the environment. Mm-hmm. Fortunately, this country physically here, geographically, has not experienced war. So when they come home, they're away from it. Versus a first responder who serves in a community, the community I serve is just like the one I live in, right? Mm-hmm. So when I leave, I don't really leave. Exactly. So there is a distinguishment there, but there's a lot of overlap into the types of impacts and emotional trauma that can be endured by both groups.
Right, exactly. So when I went from the VA at Emory University, I started working in a hospital downtown Atlanta before I came here, and really working with urban or civilian trauma. And that's exactly right, is that there is no leaving the combat zone. It is always around you. And so the things that you want to unlearn as a veteran coming back stateside are not really things necessarily you want to unlearn as a first responder or someone just living in a city that is dangerous, right? So
Right.
you want to still remain on guard. You want to pay attention to danger. And these are the things that I really study, is really understanding threat and understanding safety, and when it's appropriate to respond and how your brain responds to those different things.
Let's dive right into that.
Okay.
How do early life experiences, genetics, and personal history shape a person's risk or resilience when it comes to trauma?
I mean, so many reasons. I think childhood trauma, we know, is a really big risk factor for any kinds of trauma. You know, I've done a lot of work in emergency department studies, and people who had emergency department come in from a vehicle accident, if they had childhood trauma, they're more likely to develop PTSD. Same for any occupation that's high risk. You know, childhood trauma is going to increase risk. And it is just that repetitive stress, because it is wearing at your body and your brain. And your brain is less able then to respond with the next set of traumas and the next set of traumas. It's what we called like a multi-hit. It keeps getting hit and hit. And
like
hit.
getting a concussion the first time's tough, and the
Exactly.
third and fourth one gets real easy to get.
Right. And the brain is very adaptive. It will change. It's always changing. But there are ways in which it might be more vulnerable. And childhood trauma is one. A lot of different forms of adversity, poverty can be a really big risk factor. And then there are genetics. So we know in PTSD, there's not one gene that predisposes you for PTSD. But there is some genetic risk, because the number of people who experience trauma is much larger than the number of people who will develop PTSD. So it's still, thankfully, a small proportion of people who will go on to develop this debilitating disorder, which means the majority of people are resilient.
Yeah. It resolves in that 3 to 30 days, and then
Exactly.
beyond that, we get
Yeah.
into the PTSD,
Right,
which is
right.
lingering around. So the onset of that is from traumas and specific incidents.
Mm-hmm.
Give us a scale of the spectrum of traumas, and what is a trauma versus not a trauma? Because we hear a lot of like
exactly.
the social media influence of, oh, my trauma is my this, my that. It sounds patronizing. So give us a little bit more definition of trauma, whether it's childhood, adult, whatever.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I mean, we hear, I've been traumatized all the time. You know, it's used in just, you know, everyday language.
People say they have PTSD now.
I
It's
know.
like, you don't even have a diagnosis.
Exactly.
How do you have this?
Someone will say, you know, I was traumatized by waiting in line to get my sandwich. You know, like that's. Like,
I've been that hungry.
Yeah,
I know.
yeah, exactly. I mean, so for the purposes of understanding PTSD, it has to meet what's called a criterion A trauma. And a criterion A trauma really means that it was severely life-threatening, or, you know, it was an insult in a way that could have been life-threatening, either to you or to someone very close to you. So waiting in line for a sandwich doesn't really count. But
Not even morally debilitating, literally and unsafe to me physically.
physically, yeah, and you know, and a sexual assault can count like that
Sure.
if you
That's
think
certainly
you're
physical. Yeah.
Exactly. There are, you know, childhood abuses that count as traumas that because they're such an insult, you know, but they still need to have that level of fear
Sure.
and terror.
The
like,
impressionability might be a lower risk, but you're still causing them to go over that edge to mark it as a trauma?
right, yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, not everything is going to count towards this definition. And partly that was to try to segregate extreme stressors, because there are extreme stressors that can have effects on mental health from a traumatic event. So a traumatic event does have this very specific definition in the DSM that does require this almost life-threatening level of experience.
And so what would be the difference between something defined that way or something just underneath that? Like how do you segregate the two, and then how are they also the same?
We talk a lot about how sometimes it's your perception of trauma that's even more important. So if I think I was in a life-threatening situation, might be more important than if it really was, you know.
Right.
Like if someone held a gun to my hand but didn't have bullets in it, it would still be a criterion A trauma for me, even though I was maybe never in danger of actually dying. You know, so there are like these
It's certainly relative to the person and their experiences.
Exactly. So
especially if you've never seen guns and there's one being pointed at you.
Yeah.
Even if you know it's, quote, unloaded, there's still going to be a giant fear from that.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
scary stuff out there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so what are the key findings from your research that can influence or enhance our understanding of trauma? What have you learned to help us better understand the impact of trauma and what's actually going inside?
So a lot of my work is really focused on fear responses, and part of that is that we know that the brain circuits that react to threatening stimuli in the environment, things that tell you that this is dangerous or this is safe, those can go haywire in PTSD. And so a good example that we actually use is from combat trauma, so someone who is stateside and doesn't have that life-threatening danger anymore, but might hear a news helicopter and respond as if they were back in Vietnam, for example. Because the cues of the helicopter, the sound, those all are such reminders of the traumatic event. And what they're not able to do in that moment is override the fear and say, oh no, I'm back home, I'm not in a war zone anymore. And that is trickier in civilian trauma because, as I said, the combat zone is kind of always there. But in some ways, then you need to even more be able to, what we would call, discriminate between danger and safety to understand when am I truly in danger and I need to respond that way, and when am I safe and I can take my kids to school and I can function in a normal way, leaving my house, doing all the things I need to do in times when it's safe. So understanding safety when your brain really wants to tell you you're in danger all the time. So those moments when you're not in danger, really responding appropriately. So a lot of my work is really focused on what we call a fear inhibition, or regulating that overwhelming feeling of fear. And so we've tried to look at it through brain imaging. We've also used what we call fear conditioning paradigms, where we use a laboratory test to train people to be afraid of something. And then we also train people to not be afraid of something. So we have what's called a safety signal. So we have a shape that appears on a computer screen, and it's never going to be dangerous. Nothing bad is ever going to happen when that thing is on the screen. And people know that. Veterans know that. People with trauma and PTSD know that because they can press a button and say, I'm safe. But their brain doesn't know that. And so they are responding physiologically. They're responding with their brain activation as if they were in danger. And so those are kinds of the things that we want to maybe target in treatments for PTSD, so that when they know they're safe, they actually can physiologically respond that way.
So they can kind of cancel the alarm, if you will.
Exactly.
So how I think about it as a firefighter is I go to a fire alarm, and I can silence the alarm. I can recognize the presence or absence of danger, and I can hit a button. Yeah. It's almost like, okay, the alarm's going off. Is anything on fire? No? Okay, let's silence this thing and investigate a little bit.
Yeah, that's a great example.
Yeah, it's kind of how I feel about it. Like, there's a problem. Is there? It's almost like an air brake to slow you down and just double check on that, because it sounds like there's an automatic response from the body that gets us geared up. Yeah. Fight or flight.
Yeah, and that's adaptive, right? We want to keep that. That's, I think, part of the problem is that we don't want to get rid of that fear response.
We just want to activate it appropriately.
Exactly. And we want to be able to turn off the alarm when the fire isn't there.
There's a time and place.
Exactly.
Like everything else.
Exactly.
Dirty jokes and your brain firing up, right?
Exactly.
Okay, so are there additional studies or data that you believe more frontline leaders or clinicians should be aware of, whether it's PTSD, trauma, mental health at all?
I mean, I think one of my concerns is, especially when it comes to PTSD, that there's just such a stigma when it comes to anything psychiatry related. Like, the brain is such a mystery. And as an organ, we don't think of mental health as it's originating in the brain. If you had a broken arm, I wouldn't blame you for that. I would just say you have a broken arm and this is, a physical problem. We're going to fix it. But with mental health, people think there's something wrong with you when it really is just that your brain is reacting this way.
And when you say that, it almost feels like what's wrong with your decision making? Yeah. Like it's a flaw.
Right. Why can't you do this? I don't, why can't you turn off the alarm? Like, it seems like if only you had more willpower, or maybe if you were stronger, like you could do that. And that's stigma, and that's not real. your brain reacting in inappropriate ways is just the same as if I couldn't stop coughing because I had pneumonia. Like it's that level of your body responding. It's not a character flaw. I'm not coughing because I have self-discipline about it, right? So one of the things that I think is important to communicate is that the brain is an organ like any other, and brain illnesses are just like any other illnesses. And, we can target that in treatment, and they're very fixable. I think, another thing that I worry about is that people with PTSD think that they can never get better. And we actually have really good data showing that people do get better.
That's two things I've heard from interviewing people with PTSD or previous PTSD is they literally feel like it's done. I'm going to die feeling this way. It's going to be a much shorter life. It's hell. Yeah. And what's interesting or maybe ironic, I don't know, but every clinician I talk to is like, oh no, like there's huge evidence that all of this can be fixed.
Yeah. PTSD is actually one of the more fixable things. And the brain is so plastic. So even though there's still a lot we don't know about it, one of the studies that I really like, they did psychotherapy for 6 weeks, and they looked at brain volume in the hippocampus before and after, and sure enough, the brain changes in as rapidly as 6 weeks of just doing talk therapy, of nothing.
Yeah, like what you just said there, talking it out,
for a month
letting
and
my
a
brain
half,
to kind of appreciate, understand, and accept things allows maybe that animal brain to turn off and to let the good stuff kind of rise to the top a little bit. The rest and digest is where we want to get to. Does everyone understand?
Yes, we want to do that, but also rest and digest is still what we might think of as kind of low-level primitive systems of the body, but we want some of the more frontal areas of the body, some of that decision-making.
Is that the executive functions?
More to the executive function. The hippocampus does a lot of memory and context, so we want to have that hippocampus say, oh, no, this is safe, turn the alarm off. And
so it almost changes in a way to make your alarm system more accurate or appropriate.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so that would be fixing it is, quote unquote, is getting it to recognize real danger versus not real danger.
Exactly.
For the benefit of the human body, not going through that stress it doesn't need to.
Exactly.
Without turning it off and just being this like subdued thing like, oh, I'm going to die.
Yeah, and I mean, if your body was in a constant state of alarm, like just the of that.
Like that first week you have your first baby?
Yeah, exactly.
I feel like that's exactly what it is.
Imagine it was that way all the time, right? Like, yeah, and I mean, a lot of what we see in PTSD, accelerated aging, we see a lot of early onset of a lot of diseases, and part of that is just being on that, always on guard, always in that alarm state. And there's really no need to be that way if we can control some of that.
So we are in the driver's seat for a lot of that, which can be difficult. Mm-hmm. So what are the warning signs that peers, leaders, colleagues, coworkers, what are things we can look at? What are these red flags that would indicate somebody isn't handling a traumatic experience well? And I'm not even just talking just PTSD.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's always going to be things like that. Super high alert, and sometimes it could be problems sleeping, problems with just overreacting, to things. One of the things that's interesting, I measure a startle response in my research. So the way I do that is I put some electrodes on someone's face and I give them a really loud sound. Like that.
Wow. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And you blink, just like you blink now. And I can measure that muscle contraction when you blink. And that's called a startle response. All mammals have that. This is very normal. It's how your body defends itself. And one of the criteria for PTSD is elevated startle. It's like this heightened response. And so one of the nice things about measuring this is that we can see that, and it doesn't rely on people telling us, like...
It's a clear sign rather than a vague symptom.
Yeah, and also... For me, like I was a little bit, I won't say it's like a pet peeve of mine, but I worry that a lot of psychiatry and PTSD too rely so heavily on self-report of the patient. Like I wouldn't diagnose pneumonia just by asking you, how's your breathing?
You need an x-ray, right? You need diagnostic tools to give an appropriate.
I need to see those things that your body is doing, So I really like neuroscience and physiology because it tells us what the body and the brain are doing, not just what the person is saying. I'm not trying to say that people wouldn't be truthful. It's just that what you say is so painted by how you feel at the moment.
Yeah.
You know, if I ask you today and if I ask you a week from today and you've had a good day, your symptoms might look very different.
Better sleep,
yeah,
better food,
exactly.
whatever, less fights with a significant other,
exactly.
who knows?
Like, it's so dependent on the moment.
Right. So it's the signs versus the symptoms. And that's
Yeah.
one thing we learned in EMS school is what you see versus what you hear, what somebody's telling you they feel.
Yeah.
And what I'm seeing here is like it's almost like a set of vital signs you're obtaining to identify where are we at really here. I hear what you're saying.
Yeah.
But let me get some other empirical evidence to kind of measure the impact of what's actually going on with you.
Yeah.
So really I'm looking for that, if I could distill it down, change in behavior. Because one thing about first responders is we know each other as much as we know our family members. Right? You can
You're
imagine.
together all the time.
Yeah, you've studied military people.
Yeah.
And you've heard people 20 years, 30 years, 40 years after leaving war probably talk about their brothers they served with.
Yeah.
And so it's very common in that way. So I think it's easy for us to go, just seeing a look on somebody I've known for 20 years, I can look across the room like, that dude needs a hug, or maybe he or she might need a, hey, what's up, dude? You cool? And so could it be distilled down that much and stop worrying about the definitions of all these red flags, but to look for a change in behavior of somebody you're with?
Yeah, always. Yeah, I think that's always
that's always the biggest warning
yeah.
sign. I feel like I pull from a lot of professors that walk in here. It comes down to, well, are they acting different for them? And it's just to simplify it.
Yeah.
Well, do they seem like they're in a bad mood or negative? Yeah. Like, you should check on them.
Yeah. Well, and again, coming back to PTSD, because this event that's external to the person happens, you also will know, what has this person experienced recently?
Yeah, you would be completely aware of it.
Yeah,
right.
You would know. They had this really terrible thing happen yesterday. Of course, they're going to have some issues. Yeah.
And just like every other workplace, when a thing happens, we all tell each other about it. So as you can imagine in a first responder agency, hey, Steve was at that shooting yesterday and 3 people died.
Yeah.
He's walking around not talking to anyone. We should check in on him.
Yeah, and the not talking is huge, right?
Yeah.
The avoiding talking, because talking does help.
Yeah.
And avoiding talking perpetuates really the issue. So
that's the loudest sign to me.
Yeah.
When I see a colleague or anybody in this industry avoiding the crew.
Yeah.
If you're segregating yourself, you might be sick. I'm like checking. You're not feeling good. But in the other way, it's a lot of times when I know somebody's having a mentally hard time, and again, it doesn't have to be super trauma. It could just be something they're sad about right now.
Right.
It's breaking away from the clan to kind of wallow almost.
Yeah, exactly.
That silence is deafening.
Yeah.
It's an alarm to me. Maybe because I've been sitting in this room too long talking to people like you, and now I'm like, him. He needs help over there.
Yeah.
Okay, so are there any straightforward research-backed strategies that you would recommend that don't necessitate clinical settings?
That's a tough one. A lot of my research is really working with children with trauma exposure, and the idea is really that prevention. If we can actually build a more resilient brain, if we can protect people. I think it is really important for first responders too, because we know that at some point they will experience a traumatic event. They're going into a field where
we chose it because of that.
It's
to seek them out.
Exactly.
It's probably our childhood trauma which forces us to choose these professions, as it seems.
Well, sometimes I think it's also service, right? Like I do understand the service. And sometimes it's generational. I think at least a lot of the studies that I've worked with police families, like his dad or his grandfather, we tend to see these intergenerational professions in
the
that
family business.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't think it's always childhood trauma, although it can be. But I think it's just thinking, how do we protect this person knowing that they will experience this? Is there something we can do before they ever get to that point? And part of it is preparation. We do a lot of almost like stress inoculation. We're going to make you more resilient in some ways. I think if we could build a better brain, if I could do that, I would build one that had more of that. Like if the executive function and cortex, context regions, could help regulate some of those fear circuits, and I could strengthen that in someone who will experience trauma, then maybe they'll be better off afterwards.
So what does that look like? We hear that term a lot, resilience, right?
Yeah.
It's a buzzword right now.
It is a buzzword,
right?
Yeah.
It's very much in the lexicon of, well, you need to be resilient. Give us more context as to what that means and like how somebody would go about becoming resilient.
Yeah. I mean, I'm part of several different resilience networks. And so it's interesting because, there's the what doesn't kill you makes you stronger form of resilience. So something bad happens and you didn't get sick. Or maybe you got stronger as a result of it. Or maybe you did get sick, but now you're better. There's so many ways we can define resilience, right? Is it just the absence of pathology? Or is it that you've gotten stronger in some way? Or maybe you just never even experience the things that other people experience, it almost has, so many different ways you could define resilience. I think for me, it is that kind of a strength, like thinking about like almost if you were going to run a marathon, you would want to train for it. You would want to, have your lungs be prepared, your muscles be prepared, your legs, So for me, it's that like not strength as in character, but of your brain, like the muscle of your brain.
Your willingness to keep moving when you feel like you can't.
Yeah, and just to be like, I am afraid, this is a dangerous situation, but I can manage it because of this context, I can do this,
So is it safe to say that resilience is not the absence of fear and the presence of bravery, but more of the acceptance of this is going to suck and I can do it?
Exactly.
And just embracing the fact that, look, it's not going to be easy, but I can.
Yeah, and I don't think that absence of fear is ever adaptive.
Unless you're a psychopath.
We've evolved in this world and survived as a species because we were afraid of things we were supposed to be afraid of, right?
For sure.
Every species that is still around on Earth feels fear, right? So I think that's very adaptive. We don't want to get rid of that.
I wonder if that's the most abundant emotion on planet Earth.
That's a good point. I would
assume
it would either be that or sex, but yeah.
Right. Seeking sex.
Yeah. Reproductive success, right?
Right.
So evolution requires survival
or the fear
and
of not reproductive success.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you do a lot of research.
Yeah.
Is there anything forthcoming that inspires hope to any people that could take on trauma in the future or recover from it?
I mean, I think that number one is, yes, this is very treatable. If you are struggling with this, find a place that you can get treatment. And there's so many different options now. I mean,
Wayne State's one.
Wayne State is a great one. Yeah, we have a great PTSD treatment clinic. So, there's a lot of talk therapies, there's psychotherapy, there's pharmacotherapy, and we are developing new ones. And there's, sort of a big push in the field now for using psychedelics and in a lot of the treatment studies.
How do you feel about that? As somebody who probably reads the literature, right? And that's why I ask you specifically.
I think that it depends on the substance itself. I have some skepticism towards some of the psychedelics. I actually think that the data on cannabis is very mixed, and it could be very blunting and not really have good recovery. Ketamine also, some trials are showing good promise, but it has to be very controlled. One of my colleagues at Emory is using ecstasy, MDMA, and MDMA does seem to be like really showing good effects.
Yeah.
Again,
anecdotally, I feel like I'm coming across more studies that are showing the efficacy of MDMA above all the other ones. Yeah,
and it's really hard to look at, the randomized clinical trials because the placebos aren't always adequate to control for it. The blinding part of the clinical trials aren't as successful. But anecdotally, MDMA seems to have the quickest efficacy. And part of it, we don't really know why. Like the level of mechanism at the brain, we don't really know why, except that maybe it hits some of those receptors that dampen some of those fear responses. So that's really...
We'll learn more over the years,
we
really.
will learn more over the years.
But the data is showing would it be safe to say that the data is showing an expanded possibility of more treatment options?
Yes.
With also the potential of greater outcomes and efficacy.
Yeah, and now we're getting into a lot of the brain stimulation methods, and to me that in some ways is even more promising because it can kind of hone in on those brain regions. And again, thinking about strengthening the brain, that's what that's doing,
A real resiliency, a physical resiliency to the brain.
Yeah.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see where things go with, we talk about nootropics, these brain enhancers. Like that's a big thing right now.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see where these things go and create resiliency, and I hope they really do. Yeah. So one of the things that kind of prohibits people is seeking help, is knowing that they have something that they can't either express or define, and it can't leave their mouth because there's either shame, fear, whatever the thing is that's stopping them. So what would you say to a frontline worker or their family member who feels it's too late to get better?
Oh, never too late. Never too late. I mean, again, the brain is always growing and it's always adaptable no matter what age. It's never too late. And I think that maybe, again, getting around that stigma, we don't want to necessarily say you have PTSD or like a disorder or even symptoms, like it gets pathologizing so much. We want to just say, we want to maybe just make this somewhat more manageable for you, and again, there's so many ways that you can live a better life and it's never too late.
That's awesome. Any final messages for Michigan's frontline workers and those who support them?
Thank you. I mean, that's like my biggest, again, working with veterans, I just every day am so grateful for the service that you guys do. I mean, to serve and protect, right?
Yeah, and we hope that people like you are still here to make sure people like us live long, happy, fulfilling lives so that later when I retire, I can enjoy it.
Exactly.
There's nothing scarier than me than working 30, 40 years, whatever people do. It beats you up so bad that you're unhealthy.
Yeah.
And more often than not, it's a mental issue you're dealing with. It's not even just like this, let's put it in a box and call it trauma. It's just a feeling that's going unaddressed. And so these things linger in there and they linger in there. What I'm hoping from all the people do what you do is to help break down that stuff so that when we leave, we're super healthy.
Yeah, because
having a great time.
One of the things I think that for a long time we understood this like delayed onset PTSD. When people would retire, then they would suddenly have these symptoms going. They'd be like in service for 30 years and be fine. And part of it is maybe time on your hands, or maybe you're like kind of being able to put some of these things in. It's a lot of avoidance over a lot of time, and now you can't avoid it anymore. It's kind of more in your face.
Breaks them down.
Exactly.
Police officers, the risk of suicide increases dramatically in the first 6 months of retirement.
Yeah.
Dramatically.
And it's a lot of that is just avoidance, right? Because in your day-to-day, you can push it aside until you can't, right?
And one last thing I do want to dive into is, I don't want to give it a term that doesn't exist, but so when you get hit in the head a lot, they call it subconcussive trauma. It's not enough to get hurt, but it sucked. But if you get a lot of those, there's some problems that happen.
Yeah.
So just like with PTSD, let's kind of compare that to the concussion, whereas you need this event, it's a big deal. Is it possible to have these traumatic experiences that shouldn't be registering, but I've had so much of them that they're just weighing on me?
Yeah, and there might be, one that was that, like what we would call criterion A, and then there were multiple things that were more severe stressors that wouldn't necessarily qualify. So like an example might be, someone who had all kinds of trauma but didn't have symptoms right after that, but then got divorced, and they'll say, my wife leaving me was the worst thing that's ever happened to me. Or we'll have someone say, well, my dog died, and that was... It's
almost like having a suppressed immune system.
Yeah, exactly. And in that case, we don't tell people, oh, your dog dying doesn't count.
Right.
Like that
sucks.
To you, that was something that was a safety or that was protective in some way. And when that's removed, that's when all the other stuff comes to the surface, So I think that's maybe where you're getting these multiple hits, and some might be stronger than others, but you never know what that final one might be and whether it would, quote, be a criterion A or not. But it is like that cumulative stress.
They all count.
Yeah.
And the one that you think's bothering you might not be the one. That's so interesting because I talked to somebody who, over years of therapy, was able to track back to the incident that caused it, but they thought it was like this couple of years of calls. But it sounds like talking to you and talking to this person, they had a big problem, and then their ability to take the next hit was decreased each time.
Yeah.
And they did it long enough to where their body's like, do you not recognize that I'm shutting down?
Right.
I'm done with this?
Yeah.
Interesting stuff.
Yeah.
Well, Doc, it was an absolute pleasure to sit down with you. Thank you for making time.
Great. Of course. Good to talk to you.
Thank you for listening to the Minds on the Frontline podcast. We have more great content coming out soon. Please check us out on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, X, and LinkedIn. And make sure to like and subscribe to all Minds on the Frontline podcast social media channels. Thank you, and have a great day.